This is national security at its highest level. If you can't grow enough food to feed the people, or if there's reduced amounts of food, you're going to go into, there's 800 raw food storage warehouses in America. They're pulling out 40% more than they usually do per month now. Are sanctions and a weaponized U.S. dollar prompting central banks to diversify with gold? As the U.S. imposed the harshest sanctions in history against Putin, the central banks of Saudi Arabia and China have taken notice. Saudi Arabia is considering accepting Chinese yuan for oil sales to China. Could this spell the end of the U.S. dollar as a global reserve currency? Because since March 2020, gold's up 30%, silver's doubled. Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo all forecast gold to surpass $2,000 an ounce. Call the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late. Patriot Gold Group has the no fee for life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver, and you may be eligible for the no fee for life IRA on qualifying rollovers. Call 1-800-356-4470 for a free investor guide today. And with the knowledge that Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer from 2016 to present, click on the link in the description box below for more information. And now on with the video.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kerry Cassidy from Project Camelot, and very happy to be here today. So I have David Devine with me, and we're going to be talking about the grand solar minimum. Actually, just heard some news that it may not be as minimum as they thought. So I definitely want to get your take on that. And also the climate. And David is a very knowledgeable guy. We're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about food, how that's affected by the climate changes we're going through, and much more. So welcome, David. And it's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you. And allowing me to voice my opinion or ideas on how 2022 is going to move and how our society is going to shift during this year because of the available food supply, the pricing. And I really believe a lot of what we're seeing across the planet is to control access to food when rationing and incredible high food prices come in at the end of the year, and people are going to take to the streets. And then how do you protect yourselves during this time? If you're going to talk about the problem, we might as well talk about some solutions, maybe put a timeline to it through the next few months. And then as we get into 2022, 23, and the apex of 2024, we're going to have the four gas giants forming a perfect square in the outer solar system that hasn't been seen since 79 AD, that will be culminating in October of 2024. But as the Earth rounds the sun and gets caught into this second electromagnetic field, we're going to start to see a lot more, let's say, Earth changes and crustal rifts and splits, and a few things in the top couple miles of our crust happening. So if you put all this together, if you knew through cycles of history what the outcome was, you'd try to control as much as you could. You know, I don't like to call them leaders of the planet, but they're trying their very best to control and maintain control in a downward spiral that has happened every 400 years. And this grand solar minimum, magnetic field coupling. So how do they control it? They're going to control access to food, but they needed an excuse to do it. And I think COVID might be one of the reasons why. I know that's a lot to start off with.
Okay, now, before you jump into all that, what I want you to do first is give a little bit of your background, just to remind people. I know I had you on my show before, and there'll be new people watching and such. So can you please do that?
I used to buy coffee in Myanmar, which is a country called Burma. For most people know it as that new name, Myanmar. And that's down near the equator. And I used to buy coffee inter-Asia, and we would buy it down in Pin O Luin, which is an area 1,000 meters, central Myanmar, and then export it out of Yangon. And we would send it up into different places in Asia, mainly Taipei, or up into Tokyo in Japan. And at the time buying, it had been really cold one time we were there, extremely cold. And we were talking to the coffee farmers there, and they said, yes, we'd seen this when our grandfathers were planting coffee, and the British were really trying to expand the coffee trade there in the 1880s, 1890s, that they were getting the top leaf killed on the plants. And they would also overplant out in the fields there, because when they're bringing on new production, they would overplant about 19% on some of the higher elevations. But when it got right around 1,000 meters, they go about 12 to 14% over what they needed, because they knew the saplings in the field would die from the cold. And then I was all global warming at that time, and I thought that doesn't really make sense to me. So I started to look out as just a guy doing business there. Can we get more coffee for the next 5 years and continue to increase the amount? And then I ran into John Casey's research and how these solar cycles really affected our civilization through time. And the more research I did, the more I started to realize, hey, what we're being told isn't really exactly what they're trying to explain the changes, but not truly the mechanisms for the change. Again, and then I started to piece it together, like, wait a minute, they're trying to avoid global panic by giving the excuse in advance. So the changes you would see already have a ready-made excuse called global warming. So then you can pin it back on something. Oh, the humans, we can try to stop it, slow it down. But if you're talking about the sun, that's a very different thing. And when we're talking about the solar system and where we're moving through in these different energetic changes, especially we just entered into Aquarius, and these changes of ages have always been through history, a gigantic shift in perception of the human on how they see reality around them, how governments rule people, how economies collapse and reemerge or grow out of something with a new asset class and an asset base in it. And I thought, wait a second, we're going in circles literally here, but we're talking about circles of time on multi-thousand years. And that's how I got into this whole thing. I started to do a little research, and I said, I'm going to throw a few videos out there and see if people like it, disagree. Just let the court of public opinion decide what they would be on that. And, there was a lot of positive responses saying, you know what? The key being, there is an excuse there to explain the changes. Now, if I came at you and said, you know what, there's a second magnetic field forming in the outer solar system, the sun's going to be stepping down in its activity, our jet streams and cloud cells are going to go out of their normal patterns, and it's going to affect the plant and harvest dates, and we're not going to have enough food. It's going to get extremely expensive. We're going to have to ration it for the planet, but keep going to work, paying your taxes, and just think about the future 50 years and put money in your IRA. That's not going to work. So I'm really thinking that they went the other direction into control and not really being forthcoming with the reasons, as they understand there'll be losses here, there, in many places, but they still want to retain their power. So they weren't forthcoming enough. And then people are going to be really, really, really angry once they realize what has happened. So then the world has been militarized. Prepositioned assets are already out there. Enormous amount of forces. So when people do get unruly, or they need to cordon off access to food or protect food shipments like they did in the 1600s in England, it's already there. It's been so incremental, all this rollout of the state that we've seen. But when you see where it's at now, it's already in place to control delivery of food, access to food, and now throwing these vaccine passports. And it is, whoever planned this, nefarious, yes, but absolute genius in the planning. And I hate to say that.
Based on that, why do you think that the planning was so genius? I mean, COVID planning is one thing, right? So there's that to be discussed, but, and that definitely works in here. Okay. But shortages, planning shortages, it's kind of interesting. Now, I do have testimony from farmers who have been paid off to actually burn their crops so that they don't have food available, and they got paid for it. So food has been destroyed. This is engineered, whether it's actually the result of a colder climate, et cetera. I mean, I did start this out by saying, I just saw, I think it was yesterday, they were reporting that the grand solar minimum is actually going the opposite direction right now, and that there's more activity than they expected. It's going in a different direction. Have you heard that? Any thoughts on that?
I have. And if you want to do the daily sunspot count, you're going to go to Silo, SILO.com, and that will put up the daily sunspot. You can roll out through all the solar cycles back to the mid 1700s. Now,
right.
if you want to split a hair on that, which I think we should split the hair, is because the original forecast, they forecast solar cycles just like they do hurricane seasons. They were coming out saying that this solar cycle is going to be well above the last one, 115, 120 spots average for the cycle. And we're down in the 80s, which goes right along with several others' work that was saying we're going to be stepping down and it is going to be noticeable. It's great that they're saying that it could be, but there's always this could, maybe, might in behind it. But if you look at the forecasts in CISLO, it's not remotely where it was, say, 3 years ago when they were forecasting the intensity of it. So again, I can run with a moving by the month forecast and keep changing the numbers too, but how realistic are they going to be, or how close are they? See, I tried to put my forecast in back at the beginning of the solar cycle to say, hey, David Dubine, Adapt 2030, I'm saying 50 to 70 sunspots average, because I was following John Casey's work and we had a chance to talk a bit. I wanted to put my forecast in there, make me look like an idiot if I get it so wrong, and then you can discount anything I have to say. They would not allow me to put my forecast in there, even though I had the channel, even though I was talking about space weather, different effects of the sun on our climate, on agriculture. They would not let me put the forecast in. They're only institutions can do that. I'm like, wait a second. We have a disconnect here of why am I not allowed as a citizen who's also studying solar cycles to be able to put the forecast out there? Is it such a limited club that only the people that are running a observatory are allowed to put out sunspot forecasts? So far, they've been 20% off the mark of what it was 3 years ago. So as we move forward, I'm really curious where it's going to end up, and will they retract at the end? And each month or each 2 months, they're allowed to do an update, by the way, of where the next forecast will be moving down through the cycle. It's not as if you make the forecast and it's stuck in stone and solidifies in concrete of what they said 3 years ago. It's a moving target and an update as they continue to move through the months. So if anybody out there wants to do the research, please go back 3 years and find out what they were saying about the absurdly high 120 to 130 average sunspots compared to where we sit now at around 80. And you'll see that big discontinuity between the forecast and what was said. So many other people also say, as this one tapers off, we are absolutely going into what we saw in the mid 1600s. And that's only a couple of years from now as well. It's great that it might shift a little bit off of a quarter of a sun cycle, but everybody at the end of this has, even NOAA has sunspots average over solar cycle 26, is just a few years away. So the deflection, again, I don't understand what it is, how this, in the media, the enormous amount of media that pushes the same narrative, the same message out. Oh, it's higher than normal. It's higher than normal. It's higher than normal. But then what happened when NOAA's forecast comes out and says, yeah, we're going to have 6 sunspots this next solar cycle. Wait, there's going to be 3 in some months during the next solar cycle. Wait a second. That's a huge disconnect. Solar cycle 26 also, we're going to ramp up. It took much longer for this sunspot cycle to kick off than they anticipated. It was at least a year and a half, maybe a year and 7 months longer to kick off that last solar minimum to start this cycle as well, which was something that was anomalous that really not a lot of people want to talk about. So that's where I was splitting the hair on that particular forecast.
Right. And I appreciate that. So I think it might have been a couple of months ago, but it seemed to have been announced just like yesterday or the day before that China put up some kind of sun. I don't know what they mean by that. I don't know if you heard that. I don't know if this is related to what you're talking about. Like, is it possible that they're anticipating this solar minimum, and so they think they're going to alter it by putting up some kind of sun type object? Is that not even related in any way? And is it, some false front for a satellite or a, platform or something? I
haven't heard them. I heard a fair few months ago about some sort of artificial device to magnify sunlight and push it down, but that's all I've really heard about it. But China, through the last, say, 3,000 years, has the greatest records through the Silk Road, because they had the Maritime Silk Road all the way over to Africa, and the Northern Silk Road that went through the deserts and the basins that we understand, and through Kazakhstan and all these things all the way over to Europe. they understand the solar cycles really well. And each of these grand solar minimums, the Chinese emperors have collapsed. They've never held it. Again, nice factoid to throw around. No Chinese dynasty has ever lasted longer than 400 years. Gee, that's the same amount of time that a grand solar minimum recurs again. And if you read the history of China, it's about the collapse. It's about the mandate from heaven was removed from the emperor because he could not feed the people. So something had changed in the weather patterns there. But again, with the superstitions 3,000 years ago, et cetera, it was all about the jet streams moved, the rains came in the wrong times, the temperatures were really low, floods and epic floods like we've seen in China for the last 2 years. So China seems to have a repeat, and how the Chinese government's going to control it is a little bit different because we have global shipping now. So they were putting out all these new Silk Roads to try to get supplies from other areas of the world, specifically in North Africa, where they're trying to bring on a new growing area and then ship that all the way back through military control of those string of pearls. Each one of those is a military base all the way around the Indian Ocean and then back to China. And also with the Kazakhstan is a huge one to look at because the railroad lines that connect from China to Europe and that new Belt and Road Initiative all go through Kazakhstan. So if you were to take that away, then China loses its northern routes of food delivery, fuel deliveries, grain shipment deliveries that they were counting on, especially the rare earth minerals and uranium, et cetera. So China knows what's happening, and you see how they've positioned themselves for the last 10 years to really get ready, I should say 15, to go out on the world and get ready to deliver as much as they can and set up all these routes for delivery. We didn't have that in the 1600s, 1640s, 1650s. We're in a new era. It's just a little bit different right now, but I see a lot of things repeating in history too.
Okay, but what about weather wars? You must be aware of the climate manipulation. This is major as far as I'm concerned, and indeed, there's reason to believe that we never have natural weather anymore here on Earth. So, the fires are also man-made. I mean, there's so many elements of this that are going into this, painting a picture of the future that is, again, engineered, keeping the container ships off the coast, not unloading them, not allowing distribution even right now, let alone, so starting to shut down the distribution lines and et cetera. So how do you factor that into your theories and plans?
Two different levels of the same program.
Mm-hmm.
So cosmic radiation management is one, and then what we know is stratospheric aerosol geoengineering is the second. Now, when I look at Lake Tahoe getting 50 feet of snow, 50 feet, and then Washington State getting so much snow that their passes are cut off where highways are impassable in a single storm. Something's engineered there as well. You can't tell me naturally that much snow has come down. That is a fully engineered event, in my opinion, as well. These arc storms, the way they keep getting directed into Northern California, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, again, and these record cold temperatures in British Columbia that are 20 below zero, that is unheard of there. And the amount of snowfall and that port that got completely wiped out in the floods. If you were to put enough nuclei up there and drop rain in those same areas, because if you look at Vancouver Port, that went offline as well, because once in a 500 or once in 1,000, some people say once in a 3,000 year rain event. But then if you look at 50 feet of snow in Tahoe, that's got to be stretching on the once in a 500, once in an 800 year, once in 1,000 year event too. And then it happened in Washington, and those blistering cold temperatures, it seems like it's all being directed, the atmosphere being pushed in there, and somehow the coupling at the same time with the cold air to make these two masses hit and flow on top of each other. If you want to cut a country off, you could definitely do it just continuously. But then we saw the same thing in China, where they had never-ending floods for 2 years in a row during the growth season, where they lost an enormous amount of crops. Now they're dependent on the rest of the world. Weather warfare, what's that, owning the skies? That's 2025. That's just 2 years from now. Now, the cosmic radiation management, this goes back a couple of years ago. And Heinrich Svensmark is who you want to look for. Heinrich Svensmark He was doing a lot of research before CERN picked up on the same research and then verified that, yes, cosmic rays do create more clouds. So now they're finding that cosmic ray increases, which is an inverse of a strength of the solar activity in the sun. The more the sun steps down and goes into low activity, the more cosmic rays come into our planet. That's just on a regular 11-year cycle. But when you go into an incredible multi-century low, you're going to get a lot more cosmic rays. Well, they're finding that there's 7x more input of cloud layer building during these cosmic ray increase times, which is now and going to go through the next couple of decades. And it's forming a new cloud layer, 18,000 to 23,000 feet approximately. So think about the mechanisms here. You're talking about the weather and what they're doing with aerosol engineering up there, geoengineering, particle disbursement. Those metals nullify the charge of a cosmic ray coming in. When they hit it, they lose their charge and they don't build a cloud. On the inverse, those clouds coming, or the cosmic rays coming in, are building new cloud layers. So if our Earth's magnetic field is in flux as it is, it's shifting. People's hemispheres of their brain are perceiving that. That's why they're behaving a little strangely, looking at things differently, freaking out sometimes when the Schumann resonance is super high, the KP index is incredibly low, and then our magnetic field. But this new cloud layer in there, if you think the jet streams and the cloud cells are moving into different positions anyway because our magnetosphere is weakening, and then you add a whole nother cloud band in there, the entire atmosphere is fighting for new positions. That's why you're seeing this equatorial vortex start to form too, where the equatorial band winds usually stay where they are, but they're being pushed incredibly far north, just like the Arctic vortex is pushing really far south, even Cuba, these areas. So there is absolutely, in my opinion, man-made input into the whole system. Now we got another cloud layer forming from natural causes, cosmic rays.
Okay, when you form a cloud layer, that just sounds kind of benign. Are you talking about, because you can have still a lot of light be getting through, right? So plants can grow. But if the clouds then form storms or tornadoes or this or that, is that what you're looking at? Are you expecting that the increased cosmic rays or whatever are going to cause more storms? And does that work, or is there something else going on? Or do they just sit there? I mean, what are you saying about this cloud layer?
The jet streams and the cloud cells are the huge drivers of the climate from 0 degrees north to 30 degrees north. The famous one would be like the Hadley cell. And then from 30 degrees to 60 degrees north, there's another one. And then from 60 to up to the Arctic Circle, or vice versa down to Antarctica, we have these 6 layers that go across the planet. Now within there, the jet streams are moving under that within it. And then we're going to build another little layer on top. So another indication that this would be is the airlines that keep getting forced down because of the massive hail events with the most technologically advanced radar can't get around the storm systems because they're too thick in the sheeting. This is an exact, that could be an identical textbook definition of increased cloud layering with updrafts coming through it that are causing more intense storms. Now, I'm not going to say the tornadoes, although that event that went through Kentucky, the entire atmosphere is compressed downward, and created that vortice, which is interesting. How does something compress the atmosphere from 60,000 feet to 40,000 feet and squish it down, literally squeeze it down to near the Earth's surface under 10,000 feet from up that high? What caused that? But the hail events forcing down these flights on emergency flights, you should look how many there are of just windshields peppered with giant hail, and the size of the hailstones too. I mean, we're getting record hail almost every week now come across different places. These are indicators that second cloud layer is up there. It's causing different updrafting. Now the tornadoes, I can't really speak to the vortice winds, but just a sheer amount of precipitation and updrafting that allows more nuclei, ice particles, and ice formation. Hail, yes.
Okay, so to move to this idea of the distribution of food being, the supply chain being interrupted. Can you address this from your perspective, though, with all these elements involved?
I don't think it's organic. I think it's planned just as you do. There's too many moving pieces that are being halted or put in no motion on purpose. You can't tell me all those ships are sitting off there, off the coast of California, with all the base chemicals to create the fertilizers and the herbicides that we need to plant and get a yield out of the fields in America. This is national security at its highest level. If you can't grow enough food to feed the people, or if there's reduced amounts of food, you're going to go into, there's 800 raw food storage warehouses in America. They're pulling out 40% more than they usually do per month now. And the replenishment rate,
I'm sorry. I just want to stop you. What does pulling out mean? What do you mean by pulling out?
The drawdowns of the food to move out of those storage facilities to get out into the broader market. So overall, there's 137,000 participant stores like Walmart and Sam's Club and Costco and a lot of other smaller ones that are across the United States. So there's 800 of these regional warehouses that are stationed across the different states. And if something goes into a short supply, they try to pull out of there to deliver to these others to alleviate shortages. It's kind of like the strategic oil reserve, but it's for the food supply.
Okay.
And the drawdown or the pull out to go to the stores to try to make it not look like there's a food shortage, they're increasing the rate of what would be pulled out each month by 40%. The problem is what's being put back in to fill back up the stocks is really slowed down between, I think they're at a 5 to 8, maybe 10% input rate to refill that. So it doesn't take a genius to realize that if you pull something out 40% faster and you're only replenishing it at 5% or 10%, at some point it's going to go to zero, like your bathtub. If the water's trickling in, drip, 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 but you have the tub unplugged completely and it's flowing out of there, it's eventually going to run out. This is the same thing. And it's all supply chain based. I just don't know why the fertilizers are not there because the natural gas, we're looking at a lot of mandates of Biden cutting off the pipelines, natural gas pipelines, but that's a major, major constituent to manufacturing fertilizer. And the ammonia plant, again, I'll go back to the geoengineering. That hurricane that hit Louisiana, that I went right over the United States' largest ammonia production plant. And that has been offline. They had increased production and capacity to bring more fertilizer online to try to get away from China's stranglehold, to get our own fertilizer in our own United States again, built up like we used to. We used to produce our own fertilizer. But then suddenly, wham, that it was a refinery and an ammonia producer as well. Hasn't come back up. So we're down on the ammonia, we're down on the natural gas. The potash, well, we produce it. Here's another thing. Canada has a lot of potash. So what's not going to be delivered into Washington and Oregon? What's not going to be delivered up into Idaho? What's not going to be delivered into Minnesota? Who would make the vax mandate that you can't drive needed supplies across the border when trucking was essential anyway in the beginning of it? And now suddenly it's not essential to bring goods that keep our industrial complex moving forward in terms of agribiz. And I'm not a fan, I'm going to say it, I'm not a fan of the glyphosate. I'm not a fan of the incredible chemical mixes that they use and the damage that they've done to the soils. I'm not a fan. But the way it is now, they've gone so far down the rabbit hole in that we can't really come back. We can't go organic. All the manure has been spoken for pretty much across the entire United States. There's barely any out there. And if the entire agribiz needs to supplement a percentage going into manures instead of chemical fertilizers, that's just not doable. So then, you're hitting it on the head there. Something is being planned in the supply chain to knock the knees out of agricultural production in America.